Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going, a weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Back with another episode of the Games Memo. This is the Games Memo for July 7th, 2026, a Tuesday evening. It's the late night episode, late night show, because had a lot of stuff and some other obligations tonight, but I wanted to get in front of the camera and in front of the boards and go ahead and brief out the news so far this week. Like I said, I try and kind of move the show around just so it's not always like a Friday show after, you know, all the lightning rod stuff is kind of piled up. Sometimes it's nice just to kind of take care of the more casual news that came out going into the weekend or over the weekend. But tonight, that is not the case. We won't be doing much in the way of casual because stuff that started last week continued to spill out over the weekend. So here we are. So probably the most benign story in tonight's rundown is the first news story. This news story over on Nintendo Everything by Brian, I guess Northeast Brian is his handle. Nintendo reveals Japan's best-selling digital games for June 2026. Quoting from the top of the article, Nintendo recently shared new data revealing the best-selling games on the Japanese Switch 2 and Switch eShops for June 2026. Star Fox was the main highlight of the month, and it managed to come out on top for Nintendo Switch 2. Other new releases are in the top 5, with eFootball Kickoff at number 2 and The Adventures of Elliot at number 3. Let me go ahead and brief out the second start the second article, and then we'll kind of talk about the synthesis between the two. This news story also over on Nintendo Everything, also by Northeast Brian. I'm assuming the NE is for Northeast. Nintendo Switch eShop charts July 4th, 2026. Rhythm, Heaven, Groove on top. The latest Nintendo Switch eShop charts for the week of July 4th, 2026 are now available. Rhythm, Heaven, Groove was previously in second following preloads. Now that it's actually launched, the game has taken the top spot away from Tomodachi Life, Living the Dream. That's the main notable thing here. That said, we'll also mention that Moonlight Peaks has appeared with preloads starting. Below are the full Nintendo Switch eShop charts for the week of July 4th, 2026. So as mentioned, Nintendo recently revealed Japan's best-selling digital games for June 2026 as topping the charts as Rhythm Heaven Groove. At the same time, the Nintendo Switch eShop charts for July 4th confirm that Rhythm Heaven Groove is still leading the pack. These charts tell an interesting story about regional preferences. Rhythm Heaven's success makes sense given the cultural appetite in Japan, where rhythm and quirky games often soar. At the same time, the Switch 2 eShop charts show a similar dominance for Rhythm Heaven, but they also highlight a gap when it comes to mature or darker content. This is a key point. While Rhythm Heaven leads, the lack of gritty or mature titles on the Switch 2 charts stands out. In a way, this reflects a broader Nintendo strategy. Just as in past generations, Nintendo is balancing a core family-friendly ecosystem with the Switch acting as a secondary cozy console, while the Switch 2, as the primary, is still defining its global appeal. So, a couple notes there. Things that I find interesting kind of as we look at these charts is how over the course of the life cycle, both on the Switch and the Switch 2, you've had, to me, a higher density of darker, grittier, kind of Western-oriented content coming to the console, and we're seeing that much more so even with Switch 2, with the likes of Cyberpunk 2077 being a launch title. I think that heralds a couple things, and this has been kind of building momentum over time, which is that more and more so Western studios see it as important to support the Switch 2, and I feel like there's being less of a concern about the type of content that you put over there and how much it may be non-reflective of kind of traditional Nintendo platform content. I think there's still breaks on that. Like, I don't expect you're going to see a Yui Bowl title show up on the Nintendo Switch, although it's absolutely possible Postal has at some point come to a Nintendo console and I just missed it or don't remember it. That's absolutely possible. But for me, I've talked about for years, since the Nintendo Wii, which was actually my first arrival on a Nintendo platform that I owned, this is the type of content that I've historically looked for. I don't historically look for kind of the Nintendo mascot content. And I don't think that, people who think like me are a super huge demographic, but I don't think it's zero. And I think it's actually very important to Nintendo's broader appeal to grow its user base. I've talked about the Switch 2 and the likelihood that it's not going to sell as much as the original Nintendo Switch. I think an important part in doing the best that it can in the face of that adversity is to hopefully continue to see and encourage that Western-style content continuing to show up on the platform and ports of games coming over from PC especially now, and we're going to talk about this a lot, with the landscape shifting, right? Like, if things persist as they are, which I don't know, like, everybody, of course, says, like, the prices for everything is going to be higher, and that, yea, verily, may be possible. I don't absolutely know. I'm not absolutely convinced that everything is going to be $1,000, but it's possible. And in the face of such a scenario unfolding, where if you have a Steam Deck that's close to $1,000, and you have the PlayStation console close to $1,000, and if you have an Xbox console, it also being close to $1,000, all of a sudden we're living in this wackadoodle world where, despite all of the sturm and drang that was prognosticated about the cost of the Nintendo Switch 2, you have the Nintendo Switch 2 landing on its feet as the most affordable console in an era that I have described as the end of great affordability in gaming, and the beginning of the persistent, I can't remember what I call it, the persistent, long enduring bubble, right? Where the industry continues to kind of totter and teeter along, on the brink of what everybody feels like is a collapse, with the result of that being constantly inflating prices. So, I think it's good to have, like I said, that Western, darker, grittier style content show up on the platform, and then for the Switch 2 to grow as a platform that has this broad spectrum of content, again, much more so kind of publicly facing, because those titles have been there before, right? But, you didn't always know that those titles were there unless you went and actively looked. Like, I don't think the media did a particularly great job of, informing you. And I've talked, over the last few weeks especially how I feel like the games media is particularly falling down right in the realm of discovery these days, because they only focus on like, the top 10 titles, at any one point. So let me catch up with chat and see what's going on over here. Thanks a lot, Rachel, coming through. Drew, I like a new jumping off, or dropping, like a new dropping off. I'm not sure what you mean, Hero, but I do appreciate you stopping through. I'm sure you will clarify. I'm sure you're also at work. So yeah. So let's see. Let's go back to the things I had scripted out and kind of synthesizing these two articles. I don't track the Switch eShop charts as closely anymore because my focus is on the Switch 2, and historically Nintendo used a set-top box alongside a handheld. And so, I'm describing a little bit how I've come upon this perspective that even though we've talked lots and lots about how, the old way of Nintendo, how you used to have a set-top box and a handheld, and I think one of the things we're seeing with the Switch continuing to be on the market, and I think I saw a news story that said it's going to continue into production, I think into 2027, and 2027 this is going to be its last year, that I feel like to a certain extent Nintendo has kind of returned to this dual-pronged attack of at least a premier console and a secondary console in a more prevalent way than we've seen in other console generations, not just Nintendo. I've talked about, how the landscape is going to be next generation, and that where we have historically seen like the primary console launch and come to the fore, and then the secondary console to stop production. And yes, we had the run of 1 million on the PlayStation for the PlayStation 4, but I think they were contending with the pandemic and some other things, but like it was not as much of a programmatic, intentional, generation long, deliberate kind of strategy, right? But I think you are going to see that next generation. And I've talked about, I believe the PlayStation 6 is going to launch and the PlayStation 5 is going to continue in production, whereas in the past, the PlayStation 5 would have stopped, right? You would have broken down those machines, replaced them entirely with things, tooled to build the PlayStation 6, and then you would have taken off and running. But I think that's going to continue. And so I think in cross-generationality is going to become a much bigger thing. And I think, Nintendo now is making that step of making a deliberate programmatic approach to a cross-generational platform existence. And what they have effectively done is they have effectively put the Switch 2 in the place where you would have normally had a Nintendo set-top box. And the reality is that the Switch is kind of taking the slot that would have normally been a handheld, because the types of games that are coming to it are the games that are it's not as much of an imperative for them to have big compute. So now the Switch 2 feels like that core system, while the original Switch is still being manufactured, fulfilling that handheld cozy niche. What's fascinating is that on the Switch 2, I'm always on the lookout for those unexpected titles, things I wouldn't traditionally associate with Nintendo. For instance, Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine Remastered is rumored to be coming to the Switch 2, and that's a big deal. It shows Nintendo's potential to expand beyond its traditional family-friendly boundaries. Again, just kind of foot stomping that it's a great place to be in if you are, deploying Zelda and Mario type content. And by the same token, particularly if you have, appealing to users who are in that demographic, who are kind of in, and I get it. Like lots of people play, and I'm not trying to call like Nintendo stuff kiddie stuff, but there are definitely people who, like as they grow up, maybe become less enamored with Mario or just drift off to other genres. And so it's a pretty powerful product placement and brand voice to be situated in this position where you're covering down on both. And so that player who maybe they had gone on to become a PC gamer, and so they were playing, all these shooter titles and all that stuff, for them to be able to get at something like Space Marine Remastered, but then also, pick up an occasional nostalgia title of a Nintendo mascot thing, I think that's a pretty good place to be, while you're concurrently the lowest priced console on the market. I also keep thinking about other surprises like the Yoshi's Mysterious Book climbing to number 9 in Japan on these charts. So I didn't expect Yoshi's Mysterious Book to gain this much momentum, especially since it wasn't a core IP. And by that, I mean, it's not one of the top big 5 tentpole IPs. I can't rattle them off as much, but like they have stated them before, and their store out in San Francisco is oriented around those 5 IPs. I think part of the reason I can't recite them is because some of them kind of surprise me because they're not tentpole IPs to me, but they are tentpole IPs right to the market in the world. It's just that I don't play those things because I think Pokemon is one of them. But I think Splatoon is the other. And then I think there's Mario, and I can't remember the other two. It always kind of strikes me because the Donkey Kong franchise is one of my favorite categories of games on a Nintendo platform, but it is not, held up as, one of the core 5 tentpole franchises itself. It's actually, I guess Nintendo considers. I'm not a Nintendo expert, so anybody who watches can certainly tell me I'm wrong. I think Nintendo considers Donkey Kong part of the Mario franchise family. I mean, he is not as much of a star player as I think he is. But and I think Yoshi is in that family as well. And I don't know where Kirby exists, but I think Yoshi is kind of in the, it's kind of like Deadpool is part of like the X-Men franchise, right? Even though he's not an X-Men. So I think that's the way they see Yoshi. So at any rate, my whole point of this is I did not expect Yoshi to blow up. I did not expect it to be in the top 10 on these charts. But in the Nintendo eShop charts, the eShop charts, Yoshi, actually, is he not coming in here? Maybe I'm thinking of the Japan charts. That's not jumping out at me. But yeah, in the Japan charts, he's in at number 9 on the Switch 2. Not entirely surprising because it is Japan. You would think, again, as we talked about, there's a slightly different cultural attenuation to content over there, but it is also charted on NPD, and so that surprised me as well. But it's a reminder that even the lesser spotlighted franchises can surprise us, especially in the Japanese market. As Nintendo moves forward, it's balancing these cozy staples with bold steps into the global, more mature gaming space, and I think that will be a big factor in its continued success. By embracing both nostalgia and innovation, Nintendo is setting the stage for a more diverse, inclusive, and global audience, one chart at a time. So all good stuff to see going on over here at Nintendo, while the other players seem to not be on as good a footing from a PR perspective. Rachie mentions, I wonder when gacha games start coming to Switch 2. I thought there were some already on there. It's interesting because, again, they're games I don't play. But I guess I need to just check out of curiosity whether or not the MiHoYo type games are over there. Your Wuthering Waves, your Genshin Impact, and all that kind of stuff. For me, the Switch 2 is the NVIDIA handheld, and it shows how far ahead is NVIDIA compared to AMD. It is not a small thing for the fact that that DLSS, right? That this is a handheld that has DLSS, and it's allowing the Switch 2 to, quite frankly, do some very surprising, amazing things, right? Not in comparison necessarily to the other consoles, but just in comparison to a Nintendo-based console, because these are normally not the things that we would expect. So it is definitely a great force multiplier, and good to again see that over on Nintendo Switch 2. Because if you are a Nintendo Switch 2 owner, and I mean, I've commented, last episode, and I'll continue to comment. I think we're moving into kind of, obviously, this isn't like rocket science, but we're moving into a space where all of what we've had over since, definitely since Gen 7. I always get my generations mixed up. Gen 7, right? But in the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation, really kind of the time, maybe the generation before that, Gen 6, we've started to have more and more of this, I play on every platform, right? I don't think you're going to hear as much of that next generation. You're not going to have a ton of people running around talking about how they're a multi-platform gamer, because these prices are going to make people, make choices. I don't expect to play on as many platforms as I historically have, since Gen since Gen 6, I've definitely been multi-platform, but in particular, when the Wii came out, that's when I became a person who played on every platform. And I skipped the Wii U generation, but I still, at that point, still held on to my Nintendo 3DS. And so I've been gaming on every platform since the Wii, but I've mentioned, I have guardrails and rubrics, and, I have a rubric for, price points for consoles next time around. And I'm like, if they exceed certain price points, I'm definitely not buying, I'm definitely not buying both an Xbox and a PlayStation again, if there even is an Xbox. And if PlayStation, crosses a certain threshold that I have, then I will just be playing on PC, the Steam Deck, and then Nintendo Switch too. So, yeah, the Nintendo, this is an instance where the Nintendo platform may occupy a larger space in my life, where I may have a stronger relationship with that Nintendo platform. Okay, let me grab a drink of coffee before we get into these next topics, because it's pretty much a sprint from here to the end with covering PlayStation and Xbox. So Rachie mentions I have. Okay, just checking my audio. Rachie mentions I have a 3DS XL, but I prefer emulation. Phone have an OLED display and higher resolution and so many emulation features. Yeah, I'm sitting in front of one of the. So I think I've mentioned over the last week, really over the 4th of July weekend, I completed my OLED conversion. In the game room, I had 3 panels down here that I wanted to move over to OLED. I think this is actually the best of the 3. This is an LG 32-inch OLED, and it is and it's flat screen, and it is amazing. So it is so awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with the news. So I'm gonna do a rundown of a handful of news articles, and then I'm going to get to a discussion, or then I'm going to get to my own synthesis of kind of all these moving parts, and I may then dive into some of the other research that I've done. I need to try and kind of set the table for this, and I'm going to try and step through this very carefully, because emotions are very high on this topic of PlayStation ending the production of discs for the PlayStation platforms. It has hit some people, it has hit a lot of gamers very hard. Lots of people have a lot of problem with this shift. I think, I will try and describe what I've been trying to come through, which is, and I will probably screw this up, and so I'll probably have to come back and re-articulate things over. Where I am is, if so Rachel mentions, yes, if you can't afford 1,000 to 1,500 to upgrade for a generation, you are better off upgrading to an OLED. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've been saying is, why we've been, everybody's been running around with their, the end is nigh, double panel flat board standing on the street corner. I've been saying, PC gamers at least should focus on, making upgrades and other things if they don't want to upgrade RAM and SSDs right now, because, CPU prices have not significantly increased. And parts for other things. When this whole thing started, this, one of the postulations was, the prices on everything is going to go up because, SSDs and RAM are going up. And so that's going to slow things to a crawl. And you aren't going to get as much demand, and that's going to put a whole chilling effect on the entire DIY market. So we're going to see prices starting to inflate. Prices have gone up a little, but they have not exploded, and they have not become untenable in the DIY space. There was all the supposition that the price of power supplies was going to go up, and so if you're not upgrading SSDs and you're not upgrading RAM, and quite frankly, I've mentioned this whole thing, I'm not going to go through it all tonight. The way some people are reacting to price increases is because they've only been in the DIY market for 5 years. And so they experienced, this golden age where things were ridiculous, where things were rock bottom prices. They're not accustomed to what the market has done over the last 30 years, so they're going through system shock. So because you can procure SSDs, like SSDs have been around for a very, 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 very long time, and they only became really affordable to the point where you were putting multiple SSDs in a rig, the way we have been putting multiple spinning drives and even multiple 2.5-inch SSDs in a rig. So NVMe SSDs, those things have only become really affordable in the way that storage has historically become affordable on PCs to the point where we were running around saying things like storage is cheap. That has only been an occurrence like in the last 7 to 8 years. Like before that, the prices on SSDs were ridiculously high to the point where I would have up until these rigs that I built, like kind of post-pandemic, my PCs had been built with spinning hard drives and maybe one SSD in them. So there's this kind of thing going around as if like we've been putting throwing SSDs in PCs like poker chips, for 2 decades, and I'm like, that is not the case. So at any rate, that's a digression. Some more people in chat. The Real Nate has shown up. Thanks so much, Real Nate, for coming through. Only AM4 skyrocketed. Yeah, Rachie, and that I can understand because it's an extremely low volume part right now, right? As people have moved on to AM5. Real Nate says, I've always told people don't cheap out on the CPU because if you build on an older platform, then you risk having to change a lot to change a CPU on a new platform, right? Dry Chisel comes through. Thanks so much, Chisel, for coming through. Real Nate says, I wish HDDs didn't go up. I'd have gone crazy there instead. Yeah, I still have one, I think 8 terabyte or, monstrosity in a PC. So that's been fine, and I have a hard disk array attached to one that's like a 4-bay hard disk array. So I'm good. I mean, my own personal storage situation is just like ridiculous. I've been trying to get into. I keep a manifest of like all my PCs and all their parts, and they're individually listed by drive, and I've been trying to get out of that and get to a point where I just kind of roll up my total storage. So I'm looking at this one right here. My total storage on this box is 7.5 terabytes. So I don't, unfortunately, and again, it's a snarky comment. I don't mean to be snarky. I don't have to worry about storage like for a very, very, very long time. So hopefully we'll sail out of this crisis and people can get back to normal. Yeah, so Rachel's talking about this age of like cheap parts, and yeah, there was absolutely a golden age of AMD GPUs where like you could get, because they weren't selling in comparison to NVIDIA parts, like you could get an NVIDIA GPU, not NVIDIA, you could get an AMD GPU for like $200. That was powerful. So unfortunately those days are probably over. I mean, we're probably moving past. I mean, for a while, we had even lost the plot on even the $500 GPU, right? And, we saw kind of a return to that a little bit in the 5000 series era. But, even then, sometimes those were like the 8 gigabyte GPUs. Real Nate says, I've got a lot of storage now, but that's provided everything holds up. Yep, and if it doesn't, let's pray they honor the warranty, unlike a lot of companies these days. Okay, let's get into the PlayStation news. Like I said, I'm going to try and step through this very carefully. And so I appreciate all the PC talk, because that's helped kind of settle me down and make me more comfortable. Maybe I'll be able to get through this a little more quickly. Here's been my point. I understand the emotional reaction that some people have to this notion of losing a thing that they love on the PlayStation platform. And I even understand a little bit of the extrapolation to this feeling that means all physical is going away. I think you've been helped to get there emotionally by the games media, because that's the headlines they've been running, right? The end of physical media. No, it's the end of physical media on the PlayStation platform. There are other platforms where there may still be physical media, but I get it. I do get it. Here's where we start to kind of part waters. I'm not bothered by how anybody feels. I think I mentioned on the podcast, and maybe I said it a little aggressively. Like I don't really. It wasn't on a podcast. It was actually in a voice message I left in a Discord. Like, I don't really care how anybody feels. I get that. People can choose to feel the way that they want to. I get that I'm wired a little differently, where, you know, between being a systems engineer and being in software development and in a lifelong, like, you know, consumer electronics and reviewer, like, these things happen, and I, you know, make it, like, it's funny because I've been playing Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales recently, and, you know, and Genki is always talking about making a pros and cons list, and I just sit down and make my pros and cons list and quantify, like, where, you know, my value for requirements are, and I do my down selects, and then I make a decision and I move on. But I get, like gaming is a passionate hobby, and I get, like, there are people who are passionate about it, right? Here's where we start to break waters. Where I start to break waters is when, in an absence of doing research, there is a immediate effort to ascribe a maliciousness to why this is happening. And I mean, extending beyond the corporate greed, which is another kind of trope that I don't agree with, because I feel like that represents, to me, a lack of understanding of capitalism. So let me go ahead and cover that. And yes, it's going to feel like a lecture, but here's my stance. There's capitalism. There's Marxism, socialism, communism, that go hand in hand with different types of markets, right, that align to those. Capitalism. In capitalism, here's my personal belief and philosophy and the way that I look at things. No one is out to charge you a fair price. Once you are beyond building something in a garage for the sheer joy of, like, your kids playing with it and maybe 5 neighborhood kids coming by and buying a copy and being like that hobbyist inventor in your garage, once you do that, nobody's building these things for joy. The John Linneman rant on Digital Foundry, again, I understand the source of it, but where I severely disagree with him was his statement that, you know, these things are built to bring people joy. They absolutely are not. These things are not built to bring you joy. These are goods manufactured by a corporation for the express purpose of being sold as products to demand the best price that they can obtain from them, so that the C-suite can meet their fiduciary responsibility to return the greatest return on investment to the shareholders. Period. That is the spiel. This notion that, like, all of these things are made by, like, Johnny Ives sitting in a barometric chamber, like, for the sheer joy of inventing, and, you know, with the hopes that if he were a great philanthropist, he could just hand them out for free. Like, I don't know where that fantasy or that fairy tale came from. That is not the way the world works. The reason the thing got built is because some suit came into a lab full of engineers and said, I need you to build a thing. Period. And yes, there's all of the romanticism of, like, how the Xbox came about. And yes, there are pieces of that. And I'm not saying they're not. I'm not saying that they are built with zero concern of joy. Certainly, that's part of the formula. But when you strip all that stuff away, and I do a lot of this when I do consulting, or when I walk into new organizations or agencies, corporations. One of the exercises I do is strip all the bullshit away and all the politics and all the flowery foo-foo Tiffany cup links, right? Tell me, what is the thing that you produce? What is your singular product? What is the one thing that, like, if somebody came in here and, like, stripped everything away from your company, what is the one thing that defines what you do, who you are? And that's kind of what I'm doing here. Like, these things are built to be sold. And in capitalism, no one is trying to charge you a fair price. That's another fairy tale that I feel like is going on. No one is trying to charge you a fair price. Once you are beyond being the mom and pop shop, right, just trying to make ends meet, right, and sell people stuff at a good price, with, like, their largest aspiration being to hopefully one day own 2 stores in their one water tower town and be a local chain. Once you break beyond that, particularly when you get to an investor-owned corporation, no one is trying to charge you a fair price. People are trying to charge you a competitive price. The only reason company X charges you a lower price than company Y is because company X is trying to undercut company Y so that they can sell you their product. They are not doing it to be a nice guy. All that crap that has come up in the gaming community in the last 13 years in the era of Phil Spencer, that like certain gaming companies are trying to do something because they're altruistic or benevolent. That's all a bunch of BS that content creators and influencers have fed to you. Now I'm getting spun up, and I didn't intend to get spun up tonight, but I am very, very pointed and very direct. No one is trying to charge you a fair price. No one is building you stuff for joy, to make you happy, for that express purpose. And so this notion of like corporate greed, guys, it's all corporate greed. I don't know why we throw that term around as if we're singling anybody out. If anybody's cutting you a break or cutting you a good deal, it is simply because they are trying to get into your wallet faster and deeper than the other guy. And that's the only reason. None of them are doing it to do you a solid. So the application of the term corporate greed as if one company is being more evil than the other, I'm sorry, that's just not a realistic outlook on the world. And I'm just going to be quite frank about that. So my point in that is that, again, going back to where we part waters is the attempt to ascribe maliciousness to this, right? As if, Dirk Dastardly is down in his secret lair, twiddling his thumbs, right? Imagining how he's gonna like that's what they're all doing. And so calling one out over the other, to me, kind of makes no sense, right? It's all about trying to maximize profit. So then it's the step aside from, let me ascribe malicious intent to it, which I think, unfortunately, kind of blunts and dulls people's curiosity and their seeking for information, and causes them to latch on to maybe the first thing that crosses their windshield that corroborates their bias for this particular topic. And so then it's the leap to then believe in that malicious causality with very little to no objective evidence that supports it. The lack of need for veracity in the thing that's reported or claimed or asserted. Then it's the extension to, because I've ascribed malicious intent to it, I therefore believe that there is weight in the social media pushback, and that I ascribe to, the failure that PlayStation is currently experiencing, because it's proven by the social media backlash, and the social media backlash has weight. Because this, and then I think this is the final step, and then because I believe that the social media backlash has weight, there will therefore be cataclysmic extinction level event type consequences if PlayStation does not walk this back. All of that, and I'm not saying I part ways with you because I dislike you. All of that for me, and this is a very personal thing that I'm describing now, all of that for me is just the antithesis of the way that I kind of think and deal with the world. And so it may feel like when I'm offering counterpoints to you guys, when you bring those things up, it may seem like I'm making it personal. It's not that I'm making it personal. It's like you have literally caused my central processing unit to just fail out of the logic loop. All right. We're trying to have a conversation, and the basis of things, the basis of the way that you're coming out at it is just entirely foreign to me to a certain extent. That all being said, there may be components of this, or there may be a day that comes where you are right and I am wrong. So I'm also not saying that because of that causality that it's an absolute guarantee that I'm right and you're incorrect. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we're hitting a point where there's been a failure for us to be able to communicate, just because of the methodology that we're using to process the information and the way that we're talking about it. So that's where I am. That has been going on while some people expressed to me that they were interested in the causality of this, and I started digging. And I started digging to pull threads and do research without like an intent of hoping that I would find a body. Not that I was, nor did I go into it hoping that I would find something that proved PlayStation innocent, because again, that's just not the way I process it or think about it. But so, we're going to go through just the basic news stories, and then I'm going to talk about the research I did and kind of what I discovered, what frames my own outlook on this. And probably I'll try and grab and pull a bunch of other things from different sources. I'll try anyway. So I think a lot of stuff has been popping off in the chat. Let me see. Rachie says, nah, mom, pop shops are scammers trying to sell you a simple HDMI cable for $50. Oh, Fox Mama. Hey, Fox. Thanks so much for Priscilla. Thanks so much for coming through. I appreciate you. Real Nate says, PlayStation's issue for me is that they just explain nothing while they currently have significant issues with their digital distribution currently, most concerning being account security. Yeah, I mean, so part of my perspective on this is, look, this is a great example of what I've been talking about for years, about how PlayStation makes a thing out of a thing that doesn't need to be a thing. My personal opinion, they didn't need to try to explain any of this, right? They should have just said, hey, the world has been trending in the direction of digital for the last decade. We have finally made the decision that it's best for us as a business to move to an all digital platform. Finito. That blog post that was 3 paragraphs long, I would have made that thing like 2 to 3 sentences, and then I would have said, sayonara, see you guys, thanks, good night. Please tip your bartender on the way out. Like in the analog that I draw back to is crossplay. When Sean Layden, for all the praises that get heaped on that guy, when Sean Layden, I can't remember who else. I'll just say Sean Layden, Jim Ryan, and maybe Herman Hulse. I think they were all kind of on the scene at the time. They all talk. It's not like it's flipping a switch, right? And then and then the guys at Epic on a weekend when nobody was watching literally flipped a switch right on Fortnite. Yes, it wasn't flipping a switch. They had done a significant amount of preliminary work to make that happen. But PlayStation talked themselves into circles trying to justify why they weren't doing this thing and why they were going about it. And then years later, what we find out is it's because they were trying to get the revenue parity clause in place and make anybody that enabled crossplay compensate them for the perceived revenue that they would have lost by PlayStation players potentially playing games on another platform, which really, in my mind, had nothing to do with crossplay. That's the other thing that irritates me about it. Had nothing to do with crossplay, but had to do with cross progression, right? But cross-play, because I think it was kind of the simplified framework that people understood at the time, was like kind of boogeyman as the culprit. But they made a big deal about why they weren't doing crossplay, and I was like, at the time, I was like, shut up, like stop explaining it to people. Just say you're not doing it, right? Just shut up, because every time you explain it, you're explaining it a different way. You're explaining it in a way that doesn't pass the smell test, that doesn't track. Right? And you're just spinning people up for, because now every time you say something that doesn't pass the smell test, everybody keeps going on a snipe hunt, right? Looking for dirty laundry, and I'm like, just shut up. Like again, I'm not even sure if the PlayStation blog was around at the time, but I'm like, just put a thing up on the PlayStation blog, like 2 sentences, right? Put a JPEG or a GIF on it, right? And like walk away, like because people are going to twist themselves into knots regardless. Like you. Adding fuel to the fire does not help. Like if you're not going to explain it, and here's my thing. We've had a lot of conversations about PlayStation doesn't care, blah blah. Like my emphasis is I don't think that they care about social media, and so if they don't care about social media, they should act the same way, right? They should not act like they care about social media for a moment and then go quiet. They should just not care about social media. Yeah, you might be correct, but it doesn't mean you were right. Yeah. Oh, and then back to what Nate said. So that's my one thing about their voice tracking. Significant issues with their digital distribution currently, most concerning being account security. Yeah, I mean that topic. In Linneman, this is a lot of stuff that Linneman went off on, and there's 3 points of light on that for me, and this is part of I express that I'm not angry at people that feel differently. I'm not angry at people for being angry. I am frustrated. And one of the biggest things I'm frustrated, and I kind of talked through it a little bit when I talked about that whole pathology of the people who are going through the 7 steps of grief. The big problem that I have, and I think everybody knows that this is a pet peeve of mine, is when things get misreported and incorrectly conveyed, and we start teetering on the brink of misinformation, disinformation. In that Linneman tirade, and everybody's been guilty of it. Linneman, Kind of Funny Games Daily in their effort to kind of sensationalize what's going on in the DIY market. Can't remember if I mentioned this on a podcast or not. Tim Geddes asserted that, Apple was raising prices on the HomePod and the Apple TV, and those things don't even have RAM, that they were raising prices to compensate for the things that don't have RAM. And I'm like, no, dude, they do have RAM in them, right? The HomePods have a gigabyte of RAM, and the Apple TV has 4 gigabytes of RAM. And then once you understand that, even if you claim the price increase isn't commensurate with the amount of RAM they have in them, I'm like, yeah, because these fabs are trying to make like wafers that support like 128 gigabyte stacks to sell to people, and you're asking people, hey, can I get a 1 gigabyte stick? Like, so you're going to pay for it, right? And then Apple's been pushed to the point. So like, my problem is like, if you're going to be emotional and you're going to sensationalize, or you're going to be fed up and shake your fists at the sky, I mean, fine, but like, don't misreport stuff. Don't put misinformation out. So one of my problems with what's going on around PlayStation is I've heard several times, oh, you have to have a credit card, right, tied to your account. And so that's going to cause problems. And I mean, they did it again today in the Digital Foundry episode. They were like, well, so like people less than, under 18 aren't going to be able to, do things on PlayStation Network because they have to have a credit card and you're in Germany. I'm like, no, you don't. You can tie it to a PayPal account. That's what all of my consoles are tied to. They're tied to my PayPal account because it gives me an additional layer of security, right, to process things through, and I get alerted, right? If something tripwires on PayPal, I immediately get a notification, and I'm like, and I know that if my PayPal notification trips and I didn't just do something, right, then something's fishy, and for me to go look it up. So it's misinformation to put out that you have to have a credit card tied to your PlayStation Network account, because you don't. You don't have to have one tied to your Xbox Live account, Game Pass account, whatever, and you don't have to have one tied to your Nintendo account. So there are alternate payment methods that you can use, right, for those devices and for those accounts, and so that's part of my frustration. The other thing that I'm getting really frustrated by, and like I'm gonna I said I wasn't gonna lecture, but I'm gonna say now, like, y'all gonna learn, right? Because here's the problem, like, console players who have convinced themselves that they're coming over to PC because they're buying into this thing that's going around about, oh, the Steam return policy is so favorable, like it's so much better than PlayStation. It ain't great though. Like, you're not coming over to some utopia, right, where Sleeping Beauty is lying asleep on a mattress looking beautiful, right? Like, that's just not the world. Like, that Steam policy, while it is a little wider than the PlayStation 1, it is just as draconian. My personal experience is working with Valve is anything that crosses that 2-hour line or that 14-day limit. And like, look, the PC gamers hoard games, right? We buy a ton, like lots of us buy a ton of games when things are on sale. And sometimes, guess what? You buy a game and you don't boot it, right, within those 14 days. Well, if you buy it and you don't boot it, you don't immediately. Sometimes I buy games, like particularly like the really, really cheap ones, right? A lot of times I buy games and they just go into my library and I don't even install them right away, much less boot them, right? If those games don't work, that game's yours. It doesn't matter whether or not you ever played it for 2 hours. If you exceed that 14-day limit or whatever the day limit is, right? There's in my experience, there's no conversation with Valve, right? The policy is the policy. There's no negotiation. One of my points of frustration, and I've had to teach myself to stop doing this, is that like when I get a game and it's not performing or there's a problem, what do you do on a PC gamer? Because this is what we did right before these things got put in place. Is you troubleshoot, right? You check, did I update my drivers? Is Windows doing some phantom update in the background and sucking up a bunch of resources? Let me do a reboot. All this kind of stuff. Not to even mention if you're trying to capture video or if you're dorking around or if the game's on pause. Because here's another thing that aggravates me. That 2-hour runtime is 2 hours of the game being booted. So it doesn't matter whether or not you're actively playing it, right? So to get people who have families and stuff, like you boot a game, you get a phone call or a message to come take care of something and you pause it and you walk away, your counter's in run, right? So, if and again, so going back to troubleshooting, right? You get a new game, something's not working, you try and put it like in a different, like if it's a sports game, because the big thing that I came across was like NBA, like 2K16 or something like that, right? You try and install it on a different machine. You try and boot it in safe mode, right? You do anything like that. You hit that 2-hour timer, there is no negotiation with Valve. You have bought that game. So this notion that like the Valve system is some incredible utopia is not the case, right? Yes, it is better than PlayStation, but it is just as rigid. Now, if you adopt the behavior, which is that I have now, which is like if I boot a game and it doesn't work, it's like 30 seconds, like I'm shutting it down and refunding it. So that's just what you have to do. So if you align to that, you will be fine. But my problem is it's misreporting to talk about the Valve system being so benevolent, because quite frankly, the return system on Epic is better than the one on Steam. And so to me, it's a misreporting to proclaim that what's going on Steam is so great. Never mention the name of the Epic Game Store, which basically allows you to self-refund. Like there's no human in the loop. Right, there's no review or approval of your refund. Right, it's like you look on the Epic Games and like they have games tagged as like self-service refund or something like that. So, again, I think there's some things that are being misrepresented as people's emotions on this are running. Hi, Wolfgang Meshima, thanks so much for swinging through. I appreciate you. Let's see. It says, yeah, they could have said it in the future, but the line said in 2028 while not fixing current issues, and just being like, oh, yeah, we'll get to explaining that later on was wild. It seems like they just weren't ready to make the announcement. Yeah, the HomePod. Misinformation is always an issue. I always try to make sure I'm double checking. I use PayPal as well. Good move. Wolfgang, Valve is perfect. Amazon return for me is utopia. When I use it, they don't ask me questions because I'm not a yeah, and I mean, yeah, Amazon. I mean, and I haven't done anything like digital. I don't think I've ever returned anything digital on Amazon. But even the Amazon, brick and mortar, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. Just like in the landscape of people's causality that they're associating with this stuff is different, I think, than people said. Okay, so I think I've covered like most of my reason, like why I part ways with some people, right? And it's not because they're mad about games going physical. It's because they're mad, and that in my mind is dampening and infecting and kind of poisoning how they are rationalizing and dealing with some of this stuff. And then for me, we just need to take a time out, right? Because I'm having a problem interfacing with you because I'm not approaching it that way. So let's hit the news. First news story over on IGN. Over 90% of IGN's audience do not want an all-digital gaming future, but PlayStation is unlikely to U-turn on its decision to kill discs. Sony has sparked a backlash for its decision to do away with video game discs on PlayStation consoles from 2028, and the IGN audience's feeling on the matter is crystal clear too. That doesn't just affect PS5 games. Most analysts agree that the PS6 will launch without a disc drive. Reports indicate the next-gen Xbox, codenamed Project Helix, will follow suit, although Microsoft is said to be working on a way to digitize physical games in preparation for the move. Only Nintendo, it seems, still believes in true physical media. So just a couple points on those things that I've run through. If everybody else does it, that's not PlayStation's fault, right? And that's part of my problem is like this is the insinuation that everybody is kind of approaching this thing with, is like, because look, I get the inference, right? Because PlayStation is the largest gaming platform, in consoles, and because we have proven the thing that I've been saying for the last couple of months, which is that PlayStation runs a console business that is literally twice the size of the other two competitors. I get it. Like, there's obviously a thing that they do probably has a lot of influence and sway on the industry side on the supplier side. So I do get that. However, they're not holding a gun to Asha Sharma's head or Furukawa's head saying, go digital. Now, again, this heaping of benevolence on Nintendo because it still believes in true physical media, again, I've said it multiple times, there's a reason they went to game keycards. Part of that was to help developers who were expressed concern about the size of those storage cards and them having to pay for it, and the fact that like the bigger the storage card, the more they had to pay. And even with the expanded storage available on the storage cards, it's still difficult to get their games down to the size. So I get that. But I heavily believe that Nintendo also did it because they also see an all digital future coming, and they're starting to get people conditioned and accustomed to the notion that you're not going to be able to go down to the store and buy a game on a card, right? This notion that we have of, the the whole game being right on the media. So I think that's the direction they're moving in. Next news story I want to talk about is Kick Guru. The factory behind physical PS5 games is already being repurposed. This is a news story by Matthew Wilson. Earlier this week, we learned that Sony will stop manufacturing physical PlayStation games in 2028. Many fans hoped backlash might force the company to reconsider, but a new report indicates the transition is already locked away. According to a new update from ORF, at the Austrian factory that produces Blu-ray discs for PlayStation titles is being transformed to manufacture micro-optics instead. The CEO of DADSI, the company responsible for producing discs for Sony's physical games, says they have seen a dramatic reduction in order volume. PlayStation previously accounted for around 50% of the factory's output, but that figure is expected to drop to just 10% by 2028 when Sony exits the physical games market entirely. That's the thing that I wanted to bring up, and I'll go ahead and do it here. I was going to save it till later. So I think one thing that should be understood, like if you're trying to process through the causality, and there's a difference between processing through the causality to land on a moral judgment that Sony is justified in what they're doing. For me personally, there is no I think I've talked about this before. There's no justification, right, at a personal level. If that's a moral quandary that you have, I think you need to process through that. In my mind, when a company does something, when a corporation does something, who determines that is right or wrong is the market. Market response determines whether it's justified or not. So trying to process through it to understand the causality is one thing. Trying to process through the causality to land on whether or not the causality is right or wrong or just is separate. So I'm not trying to pull through this so that you can land on a decision whether or not it's right or wrong of what they're doing. But the one thing I do want to say is there should be a recognition, if you're trying to process through this, that plant was not just making PlayStation discs. It's not the only plant that Sony has making discs, and the total volume of things at that plant being made were not just PlayStation discs, 50%. So the other 50% are other things, right? And so my point is the holistic, right, the aggregation of the why is not just about PlayStation. It also has to do with what else is going on in the world and in various markets with optical media. And one of the things that's been going on in the world of video, for instance, is that video streaming revenue last year was about $57.5 billion. Physical media for movies sell-through was about $870 million. It wasn't even $1 billion. So I think one of the things that you may want to consider is that a large part of the capacity that Sony is maintaining to press discs, while there may have been a chunk of justification to maintain that from the gaming side, on the other side of the other markets that consume optical media, it's been dwindling even more, to a point where I feel like from the numbers that I've looked at, it's just falling through the floor in the justification of paying the capital expense to keep those things open and keep them going. It just doesn't make sense. Next news article that I want to talk about is Sony already retraining staff at PS5 game disc manufacturing facility here over on Push Square by Sammy Barker. If you'd hoped the backlash to Sony's boneheaded decision to cease manufacturing game discs in 2028 could be reversed, a new report coming out of Austria makes it incredibly unlikely. The write-up claims the company's facility in Thurgau has been preparing for this transition for some time, and while the good news is it won't result in layoffs, it sounds like PlayStation is very much committed to an all-digital future. The report says that 600,000 discs roll off the Austrian assembly line right now, and PlayStation accounts for roughly 50% of that. However, it anticipates that just 10% of that. Okay, so that repeats it. Anticipating this, it's retraining staff and modifying equipment to switch to optical micro lens manufacturing, with the transition already well underway. Okay, I think that's the last news story that I kind of wanted to run through in brief, just to kind of set the place for this. Yeah, I mean, Rachie asks, what are your thoughts about the rumors of Xbox digitizing games and linking them to the physical disc instead of a single account? I have belief in that rumor. I've always thought that, you know, when Xbox, because I feel like they've done this already. I am pretty sure when I go into my Xbox library, and what I see in my Xbox library is like really scatological. I won't rant on it tonight because it's not the topic, but like I have been going into that Xbox app and there are things in there that I don't see in my library because like I own Guardians of the Galaxy. It doesn't show up in my library. And in fact, I guess Forza Horizon 6 does, but there's some other game that I was like, wait a second, like I own this game on Xbox, like on the Xbox app. It's a Play Anywhere title, but it doesn't present in that library in the Xbox app. So it bugs me because I'm like, okay, we're getting to a point now where like, if I don't remember that I own a thing in the Xbox app, then, you know, so, but my point is to your question, Rachie, I am pretty sure I have games that I own physical copies for, even as far back as the Xbox 360, that I never owned the digital version of them that I see in my Xbox library, where somehow, somewhere, Xbox did me a solid and gave me credit for owning a title, even though I owned it physically. It was attached to my account, and maybe I'm assuming that somewhere in the associated metadata or some type of JSON bits going back and forth, you know, in the TCP IP traffic, that they were able to tell that I had owned a disc, and gave me credit for that. So I believe that's happening, and I believe that, you know, if they're going to try and move their gamer base off of physical media, that they will do this, you know, that they will try and figure out some way to kind of credit them for the physical media that they own. Maybe Xbox games are gold. Yeah, that's absolutely possible. Maybe it happened through gold. Okay, so now I want to start talking about kind of how, you know, the stuff that I've been going through and researching this. Sony's plant in Thurgau, Austria, which previously manufactured millions of PlayStation and music discs, is undergoing a $30 million restructuring to produce optical micro lenses. Mass production of these micro optics will primarily supply products in the automotive, wearable, and medical sectors. Specifically, these. So again, you know, and I'm not throwing shade at Thrifty. Thrifty mentioned to me that Stephen Totillo had reported that he thought that these these optical micro lenses were going to be used in AI data centers. I don't know where he got that from. My research talks about these three primary product areas that they're intending to be used for. Again, automotive, wearable, and medical sectors, and we'll get to why automotive. Specifically, these micro lenses will be used in the following products: automotive headlight and signaling, advanced headlights and exterior light systems such as turn signals projected directly onto the asphalt, advanced driver assistance systems, ADAS, micro optics for vehicle sensors and LiDAR, AR/VR hardware, precision optics and lenses for augmented reality and virtual reality headsets, medical devices, precision components for medical and imaging equipment. Sony plans to fully shift its 300-employee Austrian facility away from physical media by 2028. While automotive projection and AR/VR headsets are the primary highlights of the plant's new direction, optical micro lenses are a foundational component of modern smartphone camera sensors. And if you have, you know, if you've been a student of the technology landscape and really study these corporations that play a part in it, you would know that the world runs on Sony lenses. They are the predominant supplier to the vast majority of smartphones. The glass in the iPhone is Sony glass. Google, Samsung Galaxy phones, like your premier flagship phones and most of the other phones, are Sony glass. That is a space that they already have a firm foothold in and have planted a flag, and would be very difficult to disrupt into that space. And so expanding on that capability, right, again, makes sense for them. In a move that signals a decisive shift in corporate strategy, Sony has announced it will phase out physical PlayStation 5 game discs by January 2028. So this is my own writing. This decision, while contentious among diehard physical media fans, fits into a broader corporate gamble on future tech growth, specifically micro-optics manufacturing. This pivot comes as Sony retrains 300 employees at its Thurgau plant in Austria, repurposing the facility to produce optical micro lenses. Sony has invested €30 million in retooling the factory, positioning it to supply micro-optics for automotive, AR, VR, and smartphone applications. This isn't just a speculative bet. These lenses sit at the heart of emerging automotive safety standards, smartphone camera innovations, and even medical AR, VR devices. So just quickly, back to the concept of them walking it back. You're highly unlikely to walk back €30 million that you've invested to retool a plant. The financials paint a compelling picture for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2026. Sony's total, I really want to foot stomp on this because, again, this is the type of stuff that people have been ignoring in their effort to say what's going on. The financials paint a compelling picture for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2026. Sony's total consolidated operating income reached a record, wish I had put this in dollars, 1,447.5 billion yen, up 13% year over year. Crucially, Sony's Imaging and Sensing Solutions, INSS division, a business unit powered by micro-optics, generated 357.3 billion yen in operating income, accounting for 23.3% of Sony's total profits. So again, I want to foot stomp and I want to make sure people understand a quarter of the profits, not revenue, profits, money in their pocket, came out of INSS primarily on the back of micro lenses. More revenue gets earned in GNNS, but more profit last year and profit growth came out of INSS. The growth outpaced even the gaming segment, where game and network services accounted for 30.3% of operating income. So again, a thing that I want people to understand, right? Again, if you're trying to read the tea leaves and understand why this is going on, and you're asserting that what's going on is not what's going on, I think a big paradigm shift that we're all going to have to make is, I've talked about how for 15 years, GNNS has been the crown jewel of Sony, right? There was an inflection point when Kaz took over as head of PlayStation and then moved into the CEO seat of Sony corporate. There was this inflection point, quite funnily, after the great PlayStation Network crash of 2011. And at that point, network services, which had previously been in a separate division, was moved over, and then you kind of have the PlayStation business unit, right, as we know it today, GNNS. Since that time, gaming came to the fore and really became the power of Sony. Their television business had declined. Sony Vaio had been sold off. Their play in smartphones, right, Xperia, had declined. They were divesting of a lot of stuff. They were obviously declining on music, declining on movies, and so there was this moment in time in 2011, 15 years ago, where PlayStation, right, became, right, took the throne. And that is the world we have lived in for 15 years. And because of that, lots of the investment has been poured into PlayStation. Lots of the strategy has been oriented around PlayStation. Well, for months, for years actually in this generation, we have been talking about how the gaming industry growth factor has slowed, how the rate at which the bubble is expanding has slowed, where a lot of the growth that PlayStation has experienced and Nintendo has been because of defections out of the Xbox camp, as the Xbox brand and, quite frankly, the quality of the products that they provide have been on the decline. And PlayStation has benefited from that. But now that, a lot of that, right, we're getting down to, there aren't going to be that many more defectors until Xbox goes away. We're getting down to a point where it is tough to find growth, and where you have PlayStation making a statement like they made in the last earnings call, which is that, hey, our way to growth is to further monetize the user base that we already have. So if that is the tactical scenario you are in, and you see a spike in growth in another business unit, I got news for you. We're probably rapidly approaching a time where GNNS is no longer going to be the centric crown jewel of the Sony corporation. And one of the things that you do in business at these times is you take a business unit, a product line, the value stream, whatever, where you have solid income coming in a mature market, which the gaming market has become, and that's a blue chip property, right? You know that you're going to make money over there, but you start to question whether or not you're going to invest more money over there because the growth potential isn't as high. But so what you do is you take that money and you start putting it in the business unit and in the market where there are big plays, where there's bigger upside. And so with INSS showing larger growth potential and showing greater profit earnings than gaming, you're probably at a point where at least the question is being asked whether or not the pivot becomes, let's stabilize gaming and let's I'm not saying there's not going to be innovation and there's not going to be changes in gaming. I think there will be. I'm saying that the aggressiveness and the investment may shift and pivot right over to somebody else. The automotive sector in particular is a key driver. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is poised to mandate dense optical sensor arrays in every vehicle by 2029. Again, a thing which people have missed because nobody has looked at it, because too many of the analysts and pundits and content creators and influencers behave as if gaming is the only thing going on the planet and only ever look at gaming itself to try and understand what is going on. So when something is happening outside of gaming, this becomes yet another reason why people are misreading the tea leaves, right, and the signals. The automotive sector in particular is a key driver. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is poised to mandate dense optical sensor arrays in every vehicle by 2029. This regulatory wave ensures a steady demand for micro lenses. We'll dive into that in a little more detail here and afterwards. The regulatory wave ensures a steady demand for micro lenses, reducing reliance on the boom and bust cycles that have plagued gaming hardware. Meanwhile, Sony's micro lenses are already embedded in flagship smartphones. Sony's sensors dominate this market, even in iPhones. The convergence of mobile optics, automotive sensors, and AR/VR could form a trifecta of growth that far outpaces the decline of physical media. So again, physical media coming down. Whatever you believe the split is, right? If you believe it's 50-50, fine, right? If you choose to believe that the 78-22 is a lie, that the 85-15 is a lie, fine. You should comprehend that physical media and earnings in physical media is on the decline, in some places extremely sharply. And you should then understand that where this other play is on the rise, that it may cause a shift, right, in where money is being deployed and where cost savings and, right, shaving on OPEX and CapEx is being in place. Of course, skeptics might look at Sony's past and hesitate. After all, Sony's corporate history is littered with innovations left to wither. Betamax, Minidisc, the Vaio PC line, and even the Xperia smartphone division. Time and again, Sony introduced category-defining technology only to abandon it when it stalled. The Walkman gave way to the Discman, then CDs, but eventually all faded. Sony famously stumbled on the digital revolution. I wrote this. I'm still frustrated when I read it. Sony famously stumbled on the digital revolution as the iPod and iTunes decimated their Walkman brand. Even Blu-ray, once a shining standard, now struggles against streaming giants, but something feels different this time. And so I'm trying to give Sony credit here for not doing the things that it's done in the past, where it just kind of let these things happen, even though it could see them, and stood still and did nothing about it. My frustration with digital music is I'm like, you guys owned the Walkman. You literally own one of the only 5 major record labels that distribute all music on the planet. That you were heavily engaged and involved with Steve Jobs in formalizing digitization of music as a sell-through and going a la carte. And despite this, you guys couldn't see what was going on with iTunes and the iPod to get out of its way and figure out how to reinvigorate your music business. You put all your bet in Minidisc, which is a great format. I love Minidisc. But they got their lunch eaten, right, by iTunes and the iPod. So anyway, you saying Sony lost Apple, iPhone 18 is going Samsung. They're going Samsung for what? For lenses? Yeah, you'll have to point me to that. Rachie, and I highly doubt that, knowing how Apple does supply line procurement, I highly doubt that they are going entirely Samsung. Apple's typical way is to have multiple vendors in the supply line and then give them all a share of what they have based on performance, because they learned their lesson by hitching their wagon entirely to Intel, and they tend to not go with a singular vendor. So I don't know of Samsung having a prominent lens business. As far as I know, it will be the what the CMOS sensor in the camera. So yeah, you'll just have to point me to that, and you'd have to show me something that tells me that they're like Samsung is becoming the sole vendor to corroborate a statement like they lost iPhone. That would heavily surprise me when since the iPhone was built in 2007, they've been supplied by Sony lenses. Sony's current risk posture is surprising. Historically, Sony rode innovations to their breaking point, but this generation, PlayStation's leadership declared a break from old paradigms. We believe in generations, they once said, but now they embrace a multi-generational future. The digital push in gaming may have stumbled early on, but it freed up capital. I think this was actually something that was miswritten. Yes. So the transition out of physical is freeing up capital, CapEx, that can now be flowed to INSS. For a corporate investor, this isn't just an innovation; it's a redefinition of where Sony's future profitability lies. I get it. I'm not explaining this to people who are just in love with only gaming and like don't care about anything else. I'm not saying this, in an effort to get you to calm down and say, "Oh, that explains it." I'm going through this stuff for the benefit of the people who are interested in what's going on and why the shifts are happening. So competitors like Microsoft and Apple are also making massive bets, but primarily on AI. And so this is a part why I think Sony is doing what it's doing by placing its bets elsewhere and not going after AI, because the entirety of the $1 trillion club is all chasing in that direction. While that $1 trillion club is pouring resources into AI, Sony is making a contrarian bet, choosing micro-optics as a hedge. If AI eventually sees a bubble burst, Sony's bet on steady, predictable sectors like automotive and mobile optics could give it a durable edge. With AI innovation still grappling for long-term value, Sony may have finally broken their cycle, leveraging a steady business to fund a bold, diversified future. So my point in that is... I mean, that's fine, Rachel. You can disagree, but like I said, you're going to have to put a link or something in there to kind of convey what it is you're talking about. I mean, I appreciate the difference in perspective, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to sources and an explanation of what you're talking about. So my point in this is again, to the Stephen Totilo argument that they're going after that these plants are going after AI. The problem with AI, in my opinion, based on the use of these components in those data centers, is that there's growth there, but it's not necessarily high volume, based on the number of sensors that would exist in these data centers in comparison to their applications, right, in other markets. This all points to a critical conclusion. It is now highly unlikely that PlayStation will walk back its plan to eliminate physical media. With a clear strategic pivot towards micro-optics and a massive financial reallocation into these adjacent tech sectors, Sony is signaling that the gaming division's future lies in a digital-first approach. They've put too much capital, too many strategic bets, and too much faith in emerging tech to reverse course now. Moreover, this move will likely have minimal negative impact on PlayStation's earnings, as we've seen digital sales have outpaced physical for years, a trend reflected in what we have seen with third-party publishers, digital outpacing physical since 2016-17, and GameStop barely viable, transitioning to Magic the Gathering and collectibles in almost all of its stores. Even as the PlayStation 6 launches, the bulk of software revenue will continue to flow from digital storefronts and subscription services like PlayStation Plus. Thus, while physical may vanish, the business model already leans so heavily on digital that any short-term loss of disc revenue is more than offset. Now, a knock-on effect of this, I believe, and I think I talked about this last episode, will be the forcing open of the digital store to eliminate the notion of a store tightly coupled to a platform and thereby creating a monopoly, which we are seeing being adjudicated and regulated in the mobile space via the App Store and Play Store. So I think where there is risk for PlayStation is, I believe, that once they go all digital, regulators and legal systems will look at them and say, okay, well, now you guys are just like Google and Apple. And so just as we've told them, they need to allow there to be other digital sources for content on their phones. From an application standpoint, you guys will have to do the same. And so, in fact, this could be a crucial stabilizer while competitors double down on AI. PlayStation has mitigated future hardware margins squeezed by rising component costs and defraying possibly the added cost of an optical drive, as the PS6 will very likely not have one integrated into the chassis as the PS5 Pro. It does not. By investing in a stable but expanding tech backbone, Sony is ensuring that even if PlayStation hardware faces slower adoption, the broader corporate growth engine fueled by micro-optics will keep the business on course. So a couple of the things that I wanted to add to this is when we talk about their applications in other places, in particular the NHTSA regulation. I mean, the places that are going to make an impact on the automotive industry are mandatory light vehicle automatic emergency braking, FMVSS. The mandate by September 1, 2029, all new light vehicles must feature automatic emergency braking, or AEB, capable of avoiding lead vehicles at up to 62 miles per hour and detecting pedestrians in pitch black conditions. Massive, what this is going to drive is supplier investment, massive capital deployment into multi-sensor fusion camera and radar LiDAR. Microlens earning impact exponential growth. Off-the-shelf cameras fail nighttime pedestrian tests. To pass tier 1 suppliers require premium image sensors with custom microlens arrays engineered to maximize photon collection in ultra-low light environments. The other big one, there are a few big ones here. There's like 10 total, but pedestrian crash avoidance systems via NCAP upgrades. The new car assessment program, NCAP, has integrated strict testing for lane keeping assist, blind spot intervention, and nighttime pedestrian avoidance to earn 5-star safety ratings. Broadening the visual, so what will be needed from a design perspective to meet that requirement is broadening the visual field of view of the vehicle from a single forward camera to a 360-degree surround view system. And the final big one, modernization of brake standards for autonomous vehicles. Yeah, okay. Newly proposed rule amends FMVSS 135 to allow purpose-built automated driving systems to operate completely without physical hand or foot brake pedals. Microlens earning impact vehicles without human drivers, so your autonomous driving vehicles lose a human safety buffer, meaning the optical eyes must be flawless that those autonomous vehicles are using. Suppliers are investing in high-grade glass polymer hybrid microlenses that resist thermal warping and deliver severe weather and optical reliability. So there's a few others in here. Like I said, I think there's about 10. My point is if you have not worked in a regulated industry, right? You have not worked in a space where there is a government agency that says these are the compliance requirements, which drives everyone's products to have to meet that requirement. And the one that I worked in was in electrical distribution, where regulation came into place that required voltage optimization. So I won't get entirely into it, right? But basically, the fact that you get 120 volts, right, regulated downstream to you on the distribution grid is because there's a state mandate, right, which flows down from federal that says thou shalt provide 120 volts to your power customers. Regulation then came into place that said, hey, what you guys can do is during periods of low peak where people don't need 120 volts down the grid, you can drop that. Like there used to be points of like voltage. There are regulations for voltage violations. And there's certain thresholds that say you can't dip below that. So then regulation was put in place that said, hey, during these times, you guys can lower the voltage that you're putting down on a given spoke on the grid in order to give you cost savings. So suddenly, and like very small changes in voltage can create big savings for power companies. And just as we talked about a lot in businesses tonight, when you are an investor-owned utility or an IOU, shareholders are interested in you having great cost savings, right? So suddenly what that created was suddenly there became a business for voltage optimization solutions that would allow them to do things like, say, dip to 118 volts that they were putting downstream on the grid to a spoke, right, for a period of time. So there were various solutions to that. There were software solutions, there were hardware solutions. But my point is that government regulation of that compliance and the loosening of that compliance created new opportunities for business. It stood up entirely new businesses out of Silicon Valley. In other areas, there were utilities that invested in patenting their own software solutions to be sold to other utilities, right? So it kicked off this whole round of investment and earnings and new businesses. And my point is that these compliance regulations coming into place, just as they have done in other automotive fields along the way where new systems have been required, can often kick off a new round of businesses and adjacent and market adjacencies and things like that. I think this is part of what Sony is seeing and where they're trying to put place. All I know is the lenses are not Zeiss. Okay. Okay, let's go on and wrap up by briefing out the Xbox stuff. And same thing, I'll just do a rundown of some of the news stories, and then I'll come back and kind of talk about my own personal synopsis. Every studio affected by Xbox's reset July 2026 layoffs. This first news story over on Destructo by Scott Dewey. New Xbox CEO Asha Sharma's reset of the company in July 2026 spelled the end of jobs for thousands. On the morning of July 6, 2026, Sharma revealed 1,600 Xbox employees had lost their jobs, with 1,600 more yet to go before the end of the 2027 fiscal year. Even more employees across other departments of Microsoft had been let go, marking a truly dark day in the tech industry. Yeah, I think the total let go from Microsoft, right, corporate was, I think, 5,200, I think. The Xbox layoffs took place across a number of studios and companies, including the selling of a number of studios. Thankfully, no studios have been fully closed, but Sharma still called it the most significant restructure in Xbox history. I'm not going to go through all of this, but, various studios impacted. Compulsion Games gaining its independence, Double Fine Productions gaining its independence. So in some ways, I'm probably simplifying it, but basically getting a Toys for Bob deal. Ninja Theory and Undead Labs picked up by an as yet unnamed buyer. One note on this, my personal perspective is, one theory could be the companies buying them are not announced yet because they're waiting for something. I don't know what, but I also think that there's a risk that the reason they weren't announced is because the deal isn't done, right? So there may be small bits and pieces of things to wire down and T's and C's for how the sale is going to go, and how Game Pass is impacted and things like that. I think on the Undead Labs deal, what we've seen an indication that there's no obligation by the buyer to put State of Decay 3 in Game Pass. So I just don't know that those deals are done. And so I would keep an eye out for, the possibility that they won't, stick the landing as currently advertised. Arcane Leon, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with Arcane Leon, as lots of people have reported. French laws are vastly different. Labor laws are vastly different all over Europe in comparison to the U.S. And you can't just, lay people off, close studios, things like that, without going through some type of arbitration procedure, without an elected or an appointed, I think, government representative. So that's being arbitrated right now on what's going to happen with Arcane Leon. And then big cuts at Activision, Blizzard, Bethesda, ZeniMax, King and Mojang. I don't know that King and Mojang got any cuts. The thing is that they've been elevated out of the studio farm system to report directly to Asha Sharma. I believe that is because the focus is going to be a big effort and play into mobile. and a big effort in play to take on this TikTok monster that they've been describing since last November, that they see as their competitor in the attention-based economy. Asha Sharma made this, what I think is a totally ludicrous statement of, I want Xbox to, I want 1 billion, users a day to be, putting views into Xbox. And, I don't believe that that's possible, but I will say the only way you get anywhere near achieving that objective is by piercing the veil in mobile. And then Obsidian Entertainment got cuts. I think what I saw was heavy cuts to the Avowed team. Report Obsidian losing around 1/4 of its staff to Xbox Reset. The Pentiment and Outer World Studios reportedly losing 60 to 70 employees in the cuts. This news story over on Game Developer by Daniel Riendeau. Obsidian Entertainment, creators of the Outer Worlds, Grounded, Pentiment, Avowed, and more, has been hit with heavy layoffs in the so-called Xbox Reset today. Kotaku reports around 1/4 of the staff has been impacted, with 60 to 70 roles cut across all departments. Some cuts are immediate, and some staff have been told they will be part of the upcoming second wave. Looking through LinkedIn posts from impacted employees, it's apparent that many of those impacted were senior talent, including some with over a decade of experience at the studio, reads the report. The art director on the Outer Worlds and the studio's only recruiter were among those laid off. Having been somebody who went through a period of time in a large Fortune 500 corporation where they were rolling the layoffs for about 4 years, I want to say. Quite honestly, I can't imagine the axe over your head of coming in every day and not knowing this day might be the day. Right, this whole thing of we're laying off 1,600 now, and 1,600 more you guys are going to go over the next 365 days. Just coming in and never know. I mean, it's already bad enough with rolling layoffs where there are chunks of 200, 300 people being cut at a time. But this whole notion that you could come in and on any given Sunday get the tap on the shoulder. Not literally every Sunday. I'm I'm trading on the movie title, right? But get the tap on the shoulder, right, and be told, grab your stuff, clear out your desk. I can't imagine. Xbox, this news story also over on Game Developer. Xbox cutting 3,200 jobs and parting ways with Double Fine, Compulsion, Ninja Theory, and Undead Labs. Microsoft has commenced what it describes as the most significant restructure in Xbox history and confirmed it will be eliminating 3,200 roles across its video game division by the end of the current fiscal year. The company has laid off 1,600 workers immediately, with more cuts to follow. 4 studios are being jettisoned from the Xbox Game Studios ecosystem, with South of Midnight developer Compulsion Games and Psychonauts maker Double Fine both returning to independence with full ownership of their respective IP catalogs. So that's a good deal. I mean, it's not a good deal, but, it's a, less worse deal than it could have been. Ninja Theory and Undead Labs have agreed to join new ownership with the financing required to bring Senua and State of Decay 3 to market. A lot of this, again, being painted as benevolence. I don't think this is benevolence. I think this is things that had to be done to get the deal done, because when Microsoft tried to sell off the initiative and asserted that they were keeping the IP, they got no buyers. So and what I'm not going to do, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to read the entirety of the memo. We'll talk about some of the metrics from this memo that popped out at me. Our platform teams are 40% larger than they were at the start of this generation, even as our player base and playtime have declined. This makes no sense. We will reduce management layers to no more than 5, and where possible 3. We will deliver success through a flatter organization. And we will streamline how we work across our tools with a cleaner code base, shared services, and 50% reduced vendor spend. Now, the vendor spend is a thing that I find interesting and of question, because that could be in the tools that they're procuring. That could be contractors that they're letting go. Though that could be licensing costs that go into Game Pass. Reduced vendor spend could mean a lot of things. And so it will be kind of interesting to see what will happen. One thing that I want to talk about is the COO position. For the first time, we We are establishing a chief operating officer with no end-to-end with end-to-end P&L responsibility across content, hardware, platform, and services. Helen Xiang has been promoted to this role and will report directly to me. Who else would the COO report to, other than the CEO of the given business unit? I'm going to talk a little bit about. Oh, it's my phone. I need to talk a little bit about the wackadoodle of what it means when you have a business unit with a C-level officer at its head, and apparently have been functioning without a CEO for a half a decade. Sorry, this is I try to. Pretty sure I wrote this up. Yeah, man, I can't find it. Okay, at any rate, the short of it is the scary thing that this means to me is that there's been no COO operating with complete end-to-end P&L responsibility, which means there's been no one below the GLT, Phil Spencer, Matt Booty, Sarah Bond, before this whole regime change, where the entire cost basis, expense, right, Xbox as a P&L center, there's been no one that has rolled up to below the GLT. Now, how the GLT had that split between Phil, Sarah, and Matt, I don't know. But I think what's been proven is that the three of them were stretched so thin, partially because of concentrating on social media and influencers, that I don't think that they could perform their jobs as would normally be expected in any Fortune 500 company that I've served in. When there's no COO and there's nobody pinned with the responsible of P&L, and so normally, right, in the structure in most of the large companies that I've worked in is that, you know, you're depending on where you kind of are in the chain of command, your PMRs and your quarterly reports on the business unit level go to the COO or one of his or her delegated subordinates. Even if you have like a separate business unit like general manager or VP, typically the COO sits in, right, or one of his or her representatives. And the reason for that is because they have the ultimate accountability for P&L, right, within a business unit, within a corporation, depending on like where you have COOs labeled right up and down the chain. We use this terminology in corporate business called the line. And the line is where your program managers are. Your program managers are program or project managers are typically your subordinate kind of field generals, platoon leaders, whatever you want to call them, that are running incremental, right, projects, right, that are responsible as P&L centers. When you're a heavy product company, I will admit I don't necessarily know like where that P&L is vested or whether or not products run as projects or whatever, but my point is that there is typically an organization that is charged with the responsibility for P&L, and that is separate from the people who are what we call burning on overhead. And there's a responsibility. There's a whole regime, right? People who've worked in the project management framework, professional project management, program management institute frameworks, right? You know, I've gotten certified or training within these things. Like there are hyper specific processes, methodologies. There's a science, right, to how projects and programs are run that are tightly coupled and pinioned to this notion of P&L. And so the fact that nobody was kind of sitting at the head of that pyramid, what that tells me, based on synthesizing that with everything that I've seen and heard about Xbox over the last forever. And what I believe is that there was no disciplined rigor of a project management, program management framework and governance where people were making periodic P&L oriented status reports. There were not PMRs that happened on a regular basis. There were not programmatic check-ins on a regular basis, where I have heard that voice track happening at PlayStation, right? The discussion of milestone check-ins, relief for milestone check-ins if your project was looking good but you were behind schedule and you had an explanation for that. One of the things that we talked about with Redfall, right? I mean, he said it, right? There were not periodic check-ins going on, which tells me that there were no PMRs happening. So, I mean, this is good that this is happening, but the notion that a $24 billion business unit, which had received close to $100 billion in investment, was running in this fashion without rigorous P&L discipline. It's just kind of flabbergasting, right? And it also explains a lot of, why things were the way they were. I mean, there were other interesting metrics in here, right? That, they were losing 64 cents for every dollar that they invested. That becomes a pretty big bill when you've invested, $100 billion. So, yeah, I don't know. Okay, so let's talk about the roll-up of kind of my understanding of this thing. In July 2026, Microsoft's Xbox division announced a wave of layoffs that reverberated across the gaming industry. Thousands of jobs were cut, and beloved studios like Double Fine, Compulsion, and Obsidian saw their teams decimated. Double Fine, Compulsion decimated in that they were sold off. Obsidian, that they were retained but cut. For many of this mark, and when we talk about like the negative impact of Double Fine and Compulsion, I think lots of games media has talked about this, right? It's not all roses and Tiffany couplings for Double Fine and Compulsion, right? They're being sent out into the wild where things like, I can never remember the studio's name, but things like the studio that put out Callisto Protocol, which is by all measures a good game, right? Still, the game didn't sell well, and I can't remember if that studio closed or just had like a crippling amount of layoffs. I think it closed. So you have this instance where these studios are independent, but they're being sent out into the wild in a very adversarial time period in the gaming industry where, like, I'm quite frankly, I'm amazed that Tim Schafer took that on. I thought what was going to happen, quite honestly, with Double Fine is that they were going to win their independence, that either they wouldn't even bother trying to gain their independence because Tim Schafer, who, talked about like he didn't like living that life before, like he didn't like both being the creative director but then also having to figure out how are we going to get enough money from Kickstarter? Where are we going to find a publisher? So I'm very surprised that he has taken on going back out. And I thought what was going to happen was if they did go for their independence, that he would say, hey, I pulled together the funding to organize our buyout. But like after this person is going to be the CEO and I'm just going to be the creative director, which is what happened at Helldivers can't remember the name of the Helldiver studio right now. But is what happened at the Helldiver studio, right? And I want to say, and actually is the case at, why am I forgetting his name? At Kojima Studio. Kojima is not the CEO of his studio. He is the owner, but he has another person who functions as the CEO. So I'm kind of surprised that Double Fine has not done that. I'll be interested to see if they go with that type of arrangement. For many, this marked the nadir of the Xbox brand, one of the most visible and once promising names in gaming, now in freefall. For years, Xbox poured more than $100 billion into acquisitions from Activision Blizzard to Bethesda, yet despite ballooning employee numbers peaking at 22,500, the division now shrinks back down, rivaling PlayStation's headcount after years of unchecked expansion. So again, they have spent over $100 billion in total, and I'm talking about that's the tally when I talk about all of the acquisitions, right? Not just Activision Bethesda. When you look at all of the acquisitions, it totals north of $100 billion. They were at 22,000. They spent that money for the purpose of toiling for close to a decade to then be at a head count that's roughly equivalent to PlayStation Studios, losing money that they've invested along the way to be at the state that they're at now. The result is a brand tarnished to a degree rarely seen in modern business, despite being a flagship of a trillion-dollar corporation. What stands out is how familiar this pattern is, a misallocation of capital akin to past corporate blunders like Microsoft's own Windows Phone or the ill-fated Nokia acquisition. Satya Nadella, once lauded for revitalizing Microsoft's stock, now faces unprecedented scrutiny. Why, many ask, is he not held accountable for this staggering loss? Cash that could have fueled AI, cloud, or other future-facing bets. I will admit, I don't necessarily know that he's under everyone else's scrutiny. He's under my scrutiny. I don't get it. I don't get how you read the tale of the tape of what has happened at Xbox over the last decade and how in the world people are not headhunting for Satya Nadella. When this is the second round trip of this, right, where he did the exact same thing. Like, maybe Nokia I'll give him a little grace for. I want to say, I can't remember. I think that deal was actually started by Ballmer, and I think it was completed under Satya, but he did turn around and then shut Nokia down. This isn't just a cautionary tale for Xbox, it's a wake-up call for the entire industry. We've been here before with BlackBerry, and we now see history repeating, this time with Xbox's first-party lineup gutted, studios evaporating, and a once robust ecosystem unraveling. The lesson, long overdue, is that consolidation really benefits the consumer. It is the employees, the creators, and ultimately the market that pay the price. The reason I draw the line to BlackBerry, is because under, I always forget his partner's name, but under Lazaridis and the other co-CEO at the time, they just ignored the iPhone and didn't think it was a big deal, thought it was a joke, blah, 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 dwindling, revenue, market share, and then finally, before it was too late, by the time it was too late, finally, we're like, oh crap, we should do something about it, and then just lost the plot, and then they were unseated as CEO. The reason I draw an analog to what's going on at Xbox is because for years, people told Xbox exclusives were important, and Xbox insisted that they weren't. They insisted that lots of other things were important. They insisted that gaining a army of people that evangelize the brand would carry the win the day. They insisted that Game Pass, if presented as a consumer-friendly approach, would win the day. All of these things, they along the way, they also insisted that the rest of the industry didn't get it, right? That exclusives were antiquated. Various things like they ignored what Nintendo and PlayStation were doing to be successful, and I, to a certain extent, get it. But they vilified it. They said that wasn't the way forward. They insisted that the world was changing. And then and all along the way, these bad things have been happening. When I talk about how in the world has this happened, and so, I think Asha Sharma is a pretty smart person. I don't believe that the things that she has put in her the Great Reset email, I don't believe that none of those things were understood or known along the way. I'm pretty sure that Amy Hood understood them. I'm pretty sure that Amy Hood understood that they were spending billions of dollars in investment and were losing them. And I'm pretty sure Amy Hood was saying, hey, this is what's going on. So again, the fact that nobody at Xbox did anything about it, and this is the thing that flabbergasted me about the COO. Let's say these things weren't known. This is the thing that happens when you have a COO. That COO knows that things like that are going on, because that's their entire job. That's their responsibility, is to look at P&L and look at money, goes outas and goes intas, and understand it and brief it and hold people accountable for understanding it and briefing it, and hold people accountable for not doing something about it. Again, what is today, Tuesday? I just had our bi-weekly leadership meeting with my boss, and one of the things I was asked was, hey, you guys are getting this financial report. Are you guys, is it doing what you guys need? Okay, great. If it's doing what you need, then are you guys using it to take action on things that are reflected in the P&L metrics that you're seeing before we come in here and talk about them in the meeting? Right. And he didn't use these words, but basically he was saying, look, I don't have finance doing this, so we can come in here and look at these charts, and I can ask you guys, why are things the way that they are, to hear that you're not already doing, the point of me getting you the report is so that you have the information so you can proactively go and take action. Right. And that's the expectation. And we're not a Fortune 500 company. Right. So, in a company that has billions of dollars, again, I grew up in very draconian systems and frameworks like this, and so I kind of don't get how things that are super normative for me and my expectations of how things would work, and remembering the meetings that I went through, and constantly briefing the COO and having to explain, why things were the way they were. I just kind of don't get it. For content creators like myself, this moment is a reminder: platform loyalty is a fragile currency. For years, Xbox's PR machine told us that Game Pass was thriving, that acquisitions were strategic, and that no cost was ever truly cannibalized. But as a business leader, I see the gap between balance sheets and total cost accounting, and it's stark. The truth is, this wasn't just a failure of execution. It was a failure of financial transparency, a failure of governance, and a failure to recognize that the gaming market is unforgiving. Because one of the things I keep pointing back to is, like, I think for years what the market has been telling us is that they're only willing to support 2 platforms in the console space. They're not willing to support 3. And like you're trying to keep this third platform going while it is being starved of oxygen and making bad decisions along the way, right? So, but the other thing that I want to point out is like this whole notion of like it's a reset, it's a return to Xbox, we're going to bring it back. I don't know that there's enough oxygen in the room for Xbox. And so one of the things that has to be considered, and this is what I keep saying, is people keep saying, oh, you know, there is no turnaround. I don't believe there's a turnaround. And I don't believe there's a turnaround because, like I said, I don't believe there's enough oxygen in the room for a third player, at least not right now, third platform owner. I just don't believe that the market has the currency and the willingness and the stomach to support it. Because I think the fact of the matter is, as skinny as Xbox is now, right, like, again, just like we were talking about, like, at a certain point, like, it doesn't make sense to spend the money on supporting physical media, and I think that's kind of where the market is kind of saying it doesn't make sense to support this vendor with as small of a capital base as it has. Like, it just doesn't make sense. One of the metrics that came out, and again, I didn't see it in her email, it was somewhere else, it is that this, and this is shocking to me, that 80% of their business is the console and 20% is PC. So the narratives that unfurls that we've been hearing over the years is all the growth, you know, all the growth is in software, you know, all the growth is on PC. We're seeing 40% growth in Japan, right, on PC. We're seeing more growth on PC than ever before. And the whole time I was saying they did this with Azure, right? They reported for years and years and years and years. Oh, we're seeing like of what? Like you're like 10% growth, like of what? It's like 40% growth in Japan on PC, 40% of 0.1, right, is still nothing, right? So, like, again, they lathered people up and they convinced them. And again, this is now the truth being told. If your console business is 80% and your install base is as low as it is, and the PC business, which everybody has been running around lauding as this great thing, is literally 25% of the size, right? 1/4 of the size of your console business, and your console business is small. That means PC's not really doing a lot, which is crazy to me because they own the operating system. So a $24 billion, and I've always said like $24 billion is definitely nothing to scoff at. Like they're 50%, right? Them combined with PlayStation is 50% of the combined PC and console gaming space. I don't think it's going to be that this time around. I've actually, right, but like I've actually said, you know, I've predicted their revenue is going to be, you know, potentially as low as 18 to 19 billion when their year-end closeout comes that we'll hear of in earnings at the end of the month. You know, maybe they've only backslid to 20, 21 billion, but I gotta, there's a possibility that they're as low as 18 to 19. But like if like, so 80% of your business, you know, based on where I'm expecting to see their total fiscal year earnings are, that means they're running about a $16 billion console business, which again, as I point to, is like half the size of PlayStation. So prior to these layoffs, right, and at the peak of the acquisition, they had a workforce that was 25 to 30% larger than PlayStation for the purposes of running a console business that was half the size of PlayStation. Like that math just doesn't make sense. Last paragraph is as a leader of teams, I know that even in downturns, morale depends on trust. So a little talk about like what I would be focusing on if I were, you know, a creative director or a producer within the Xbox studio system right now. Even in downturns, morale depends on trust, right? So like there were particular leadership things that I had to seize onto, and I wouldn't necessarily say new ways of leadership, but like there were certain things I had in my leadership toolkit that I really had to dig deep on while I was at that company where we went through about 4 years of rolling layoffs. My focus right now would be on acknowledging reality. Like whatever roses and Tiffany couplings have been expressed, right, potentially at that studio or inside or around it. It's like in the influencer community, like you guys got to stop talking about this stuff like it's like you got to focus on reality. Like my personal thing would be like, again, my team, my studio team, I'd be saying like, look, like this is what's happened. This is the same thing I've been saying to you guys about physical media. Like it's happened. Like we can sit here and we can grouse and we can vilify and we can just make ourselves miserable. Yes. But today we still have a job. Today we still got to get a game out. Today we still got to figure out how the flip we're going to get this game out with like 3/4 of the people that we used to have. We got to figure out how to get the damn physics engine to work when the lead physics engine guy just got rolled out the door. Right? So, I mean, that would be my big thing. Staying transparent with the team, doubling down on what we can control. And again, this is a lot of the discussion, right? A lot of the discussion has to focus around what you can control. There's a ton of stuff outside your control. You can't do anything about that, right? So why hyper-focus on it? You need to focus on the things you can control. Creative focus, innovation, mutual support, right? Be there for each other, be a team. Because while Xbox's brand falters, the industry continues, and so must we. And that's kind of what my message would be to the people who are still in the halls in Redmond and at various studios around the place. So that kind of wraps up kind of my impression of, the 4 days of news, which is, been the equivalent of like 2 weeks of gaming news, which is why I did an episode so quickly after just doing the one on Friday. T-Rock 40. I saw Bloomberg. Thanks so much, T-Rock, for coming through. By the way, I appreciate you. You didn't have to. I've seen you around the scene on some other podcasts that I show up on, so I really appreciate you. My little farm league solo podcast isn't something people need to feel obligated to show up to, but I appreciate you. I saw Bloomberg is reporting Xbox may make more games exclusive to give a reason to buy an Xbox. Yeah, I saw that headline too. This seems like too little too late. I don't see many people buying a second console. A PC seems better as a secondary system. Yeah, I mean, this is... I'm just trying to quickly process whether or not this is a conspiracy theory. I think we're in firm enough land. So when I mentioned that my personal outlook and perspective, assessment, analysis is that there is no turnaround for Xbox, that this is a matter of... like you're drown proofing, right? You're just trying to doggy paddle to keep your head above water. You're periodically like bobbing, right? Like you're just trying to get enough air, right, to stay afloat or near the surface for an hour, right, till a rescue boat comes by. I think that Microsoft and Xbox also knows that there's no turnaround, knows that there is no, right, there's no rescue, and is just trying to put on the best airs and mislead people as much as possible to a certain extent, but is just trying to grab at scraps, right, and do what they can until, right, this is, in programmatics, I kind of talk about this as fighting for maneuvering room. Like, there's no save, right? There's no way out of it. But you're just trying to like control the battle space in the geometry and get yourself into a corner where you can get some breathing room, right? I think that they are maneuvering and just angling for time. I don't think that there's any like huge save. Like like they've got some games in the barrel now, and they're going to get those out, right? Hopefully, theoretically, Clockwork Revolution is going to come out. Gears is going to come out. After that, like what is like? It's kind of funny. Like we've had this hyper focus on the Xbox roadmap for 6 years. Kind of all the Xbox guys have talked about, right? It's the roadmap, and I don't think the roadmap is bad. I was one of the guys who said before the presentation at Summer Game Fest 2022, where Sarah Bond famously came out and briefed the 12-month plan, which we all know turned out to be a fallacy. I told people it was a fallacy, but people told me I didn't read the small print. Right, that like like I said, I think they're just maneuvering, right, for room. until they can close the thing down, sell more things off. I don't understand what could possibly go on the roadmap after these games come out. Right? You just got rid of the guys mostly responsible for a lot of the engineering behind id Tech at id. So what in the world? So this Doom DLC is coming out. What in the world are you doing? Are you gonna? I assume that the plan is they're gonna crank out a few more games at Machine Games, because Machine Games also run on id Tech. They're gonna crank out a few more games at Machine Games with id supporting them. Some Wolfenstein games or whatever. And then then what do you do? Right? Because while you're doing this, while you're doing these final swim strokes, while you're trying to drown proof, right? While you're bobbing your head above water, trying to get a few gasps of air. What is going on with the P&L at this place? Well, you're probably not going to get healthier on P&L without more cuts, which is what they've got ahead of them for a year. What quality are you going to get out of these studios? Because these studios are living like hostages, right? They're under duress, right? Right. You're calling them on the phone and they're talking to you, and it sounds like they're on the phone and there's a guy right behind them with a gun to their head. Right? Hey, blink twice if you're safe. Right? And they're not. They don't know that they're safe because they got 1,600 more people who are going to be walked out the door over the next 365 days. I got to tell you, I got to ask, what quality do you think you're going to get out of these employees? I mean, yeah, yay, verily, some are going to be like, hey, if I just work hard enough, maybe I'll still have a job in a year. But a lot of people are also going to be like, F this. No matter how hard I work, there's still a 90% chance I'm going to be walking out the door. And this is the other thing that I think I can't remember if I mentioned this or not, but the thing that's going to happen is that your high pots, your people who have high potential, your high talent, the people who have choices, who can go find another job, they're going to go, those people are going to become flight risks. So now you're going to have a talent drain in the people that you have left of your top 10% as well along the way, which is going to put your projects at further risk of actually completing, much less completing on time. And here's where my sense of the regime is going. My sense of the regime is, if you're over budget and behind schedule, as we're hearing is the case at Lyon with Blade, you're gone. I don't think that there's any stomach for the notion of behind schedule and over budget. I think for the short term, that state of being is either going to be that's going to be a murder state, or you're just going to get shut down and moved on. I don't believe, in program management, project managers, we talk about this return to green plan, right? Where you're following the glide slope of the budget and the schedule, and you're off skew. So there's this whole plan to get the curves to line back up and get you back on what was supposed to be your burn plan. That COO is going to go into place. I assume and believe that there's going to be regular milestone reviews, and my sense of it is, if you come up for 2 milestone reviews and your stuff isn't on that glide slope, I don't know what's going to happen to you. I firmly believe that the games that are currently advertised as they are going to come out, there are going to be some of those that are not going to come out. There are some of those that are going to be canceled. Right? There's going to be more cancellations, more layoffs, and more studio closures. I don't believe that the 13,000 head count that they're at now, and I think I don't remember if the 13,000 is after is the calculated amount after the other 1,600 have gone over the year. I don't necessarily think they bottomed out. So, they're going to get into this state, where, again, just like they were kind of in, before the studio acquisition started, where it's what are you doing? And as they're doing this slow withering on the vine, decay, where they're going to wind up being, it's kind of where they're pointed at is they're just, I call them ABB now. They're just Activision, Bethesda, Blizzard. And basically what they're going to do is they're going to be a Call of Duty shop, a World of Warcraft shop, and a Elder Scrolls and Fallout shop. And what they are able to do beyond that, I think all that stuff has an expiration date. And then right? Those things may be poised for things that they can sell. But I mean, quite honestly, I think all of this is like maneuvering time and buying time, right, to continue running the con and prep these things for sell. And they're going to slowly whittle away the things that are going to make them difficult to sell these things off, is my belief. Okay, that's all that I had to brief. Let me look at the last few questions. Time for what purpose? What's the end game in your opinion? Okay, yeah. I mean, that's my. Sorry, I had to kind of walk around as I was talking while I was thinking. I think that's the end. The end game is to get down to a point where, because a lot of this stuff nobody wants it, right? A lot of this stuff, some people look at it and like that's just gonna burn money, right? So I think it's to get these things down to the point where they're as lean as possible and then sell them off. Do you think it's a targeted strategy to get people to leave, then avoiding separation costs, severance, etc.? I mean, the way I've seen these things kind of go before. So there's a few things, because remember, like, I'm sure that people aren't talking about it, but like, remember that there was a voluntary separation program already underway at Microsoft, right? And I can't remember when it came to an end, but I think the math was something like you could put in for it if your age plus years of service was equal to or greater than 70. And so when you saw I think Craig Duncan or whatever leave, and the other person from Rare who was like the chief of staff leave, I'm pretty certain they left. I mean, they left, not pretty certain, I know they left under the umbrella time of the voluntary separation package, and I'm inclined to believe that that's what they took. So let's go back up. So, you know, when these things go down, right, at their inception, there's a plan, right? We need to lose 5,000 heads. Okay, let's do voluntary separation. You know what? Hey, if 5,000 people take voluntary separation, then we don't have to do layoffs. Oh, 5,000 people didn't take voluntary separation, like 100 took it, that means we got to drop 4,900 people. And so then you're whittled down to the next math. Now, all along that way, like my experience in the discussions we have had in corporate leadership have been that acknowledgement of the thing that I just said, right? When you create this environment, you ratchet up your flight risk potential, and what you have to acknowledge is that you're going to lose some of your A-team players as well, because your A-team players are going to just get to a point where they're like I decide when I'm going to leave a company. Like, I'm not sitting here waiting to find out like that, you know, I'm not safe. And this is one of the things that I always emphasize when these rolling layoffs happen too, is like, no matter what a supervisor, manager, boss tells you, never believe that you are safe. Never buy into the notion that you are safe, because it's not true. Because unless you have been told that like there's an intention for you to be like promoted out of this, that like they're going to lay somebody else off, and like there's a discussion that you're going to be the person who then moves into that position, like that's the only thing. And even then, I think I've just always taken the poise to never believe that I'm safe, and to establish and to quantify when I'm going to start looking, right? And to go, and always brush up your resume, right? And just like, when these things happen, the only thing that is valid is for you to protect yourself. My experience has been that's not there's not necessarily a forcing function in terms of like we're just going to make it so miserable that people leave, but that math is taken into consideration. Like, again, if I got to drop 5,000 heads, 100 people take VSAP, then, you know, if then there's a talent drain and those 200, like that comes off the tally, right? Oh, you know, 200 people, you know, GTFO'd and like, you know, went to work for other studios or whatever. Then yeah, let's take those 200 people off the ledger. Now I got to drop 4,700, right? Because at the end of the day, it's just all about math. Okay, well, thanks so much everybody for joining in for tonight's solo cast. I really appreciate it. We went into a lot of areas that I wasn't planning on necessarily going into, and we are again over 2 hours. I don't know. I will shut up about. I listen to Jeff Gersman's podcast sometimes, and I'm like, how in the world does that dude do like more than 3 hours as a solo cast? I guess maybe I'm starting to understand. But it's very rare that this much stuff happens all at one time. I am hoping that does not continue to be the trend. Thanks a lot, Real Nate. So and I will say, just to T-Rock's question, avoiding separation costs, severance, etc. Sometimes there are still costs associated with that. Like I know a huge thing that happened when I left the company that I left. Again, who was having those rolling layoffs over 4 years. There was this state of unspoken amnesty that was not spoken about out loud, but was very much a reality. Where if you had taken Ed Assist and had taken money to get a degree, that the company was so interested in you leaving that they were not making people pay that back. Because typically there are some clauses associated with Ed Assist that, like, okay, for every quarter that you take money, you owe like a year plus a quarter of service or something like that, or like you owe service that is commensurate with like the last quarter that you received funded education assistance plus a quarter after that, something like 15 months after that. So like, again, that company was just in a state where, like, look, anything we can do to offload people, like, to help them make that decision easy for them, like, we will do. So there's still sometimes costs even associated with that. But yeah, it's I don't call it so much as a strategy to get people to leave, but they will consider, hey, how can we help people make that decision easy, right, and not create friction where we make it difficult for somebody to contemplate leaving. So again, thanks so much for everybody for joining in tonight. For everybody who came through the live chat, Real Innate, T-Rock, Wolfgang Mishima, Reichi, Hero Down Under, I appreciate you. For anybody who happens to watch the VOD of this solo cast, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever I post new content. As always, I do not know exactly when next week I will do the next games memo, but I will decide shortly after I get off this show. And then keep an eye on the front page of the YouTube channel or my profile over on Blue Sky for an eye out on when the next show will be. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe out there, play the games that you like, come here to talk to me about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. One of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. That shows on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for me. I'm out of here.